Thanks everyone for coming tonight to the public forum sponsored by the Littleton Electric Light and Water Departments. We will be presenting on Articles 22 and 23 of the town meeting coming up on Monday. The first article is the Taylor Street Well and Boxborough Extension Project. And the second article is a amendment to our sewer borrowing article from previous town meeting. Presenting tonight will be Corey Godfrey on the Taylor Street Well and Boxborough Extension Project. He's our water and sewer superintendent. He'll be presenting that article first. We will take questions and answer any questions after that presentation, and then Nick Lawler, our general manager, will be presenting on the sewer funding article after that, and the same format after that. For those of you on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature on the screen to ask any questions, and we will respond live here. So with that being said, Corey, take it away.
All right, thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. Evening. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk about the what we're calling the water infrastructure project on Article 22 of the upcoming town meeting. It's really kind of two separate projects that we've combined together. There's the Taylor Street Well project and the Boxborough Water Extension project. And then, as Dave mentioned, after I'm done and answer some questions, Nick will go on and talk about the sewer project and some of those details. Next page. So a little bit of background on the Taylor Street Well. There was a test well installed on the then digital property back in 1986, just behind 151, 153 Taylor Street. There was a pumping test performed on it at that time. It was a very promising well. Looked like it had a very high yield. And the only reason it didn't move forward at the time was just difficulty in acquiring the property. Since that time, it kind of sat there since 1986 until a couple of years ago, the Amazon warehouse went in on that property, and the current property owner donated about 58 acres of land to the water department, including the entire Zone 1 Aquifer Protection Area for that test well. So we went ahead and retested the well to confirm its yield from the 1986 study. That test went very well. We discovered during the 15-day pumping test that we could easily get at least 500,000 gallons a day out of the well, which is fantastic. And we completed all the permitting necessary with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection to bring that well online as a new source of public water supply. And we're just waiting for the permit to be issued at this time. So we expect that within the next few months, by sometime this summer. Next slide, please. So that was the first piece of this larger project. And that Taylor Street Well, that's really needed for the town of Littleton, regardless of whether or not we do the Boxborough Water Extension. By combining it with the Boxborough piece, we save the town of Littleton millions of dollars. So I'll talk about the Boxborough piece and then about how the two work together from a financial perspective. So we've been talking with the Boxborough Water Resources Committee for several years now about 11 small public water systems in the town of Boxborough. So these are not municipal systems, but they are considered public water systems based on the number of people that they serve. And those 11 small water systems have both sodium and chloride contamination, as well as PFAS contamination that was discovered more recently. So it's really just 11 small water systems, although there are approximately 1,000 people served by those, largely because 3 of the small water systems are condominium complexes. So like I said, we've been working for several years with the Boxborough Water Resource Committee to try to help them find a solution to this problem, since the town of Boxborough does not have its own municipal water supply. There's really not a lot of great options for these small water systems. Because it's a PFAS contamination issue, there's special sources of funding available from the state. Everybody's heard a lot about PFAS, especially here in Littleton over the past few years. A big emphasis on it in Massachusetts and even at the national level at this point. But these 11 small water systems, they are pretty small combined. They only pump about 65,000 gallons per day to serve those 1,000 or so people. And like I said, there's very attractive financing options for these PFAS remediation projects. So these were kind of two parallel projects heading down, parallel tracks. And, in order for us to be able to assist the town of Boxborough with this issue, we needed an additional source of water supply. So the Taylor Street well project coming online right around the same time ends up being very fortuitous. Next slide, please. So this slide covers sort of the financials of both of those projects and how they can work together to save the town of Littleton quite a bit of money. So you can see the overall project and the borrowing authorization that we're seeking at town meeting next Monday is estimated to cost $19.2 million. About $6 million of that is for the Taylor Street well, and the remaining 13.2 for the Boxborough water main extension. As I mentioned, those 11 small water systems in Boxborough are not just contaminated by PFAS, but also by sodium and chloride. And the Massachusetts Department of Transportation has, acknowledged their responsibility for that contamination. There's a nearby salt shed that was contaminating the groundwater for decades. Historically, that problem's been sort of solved at the surface, but of course the groundwater is contaminated for indefinitely. So in recognition of that, their contribution to that, they've committed to $6.5 million to the project, which is obviously a huge help. And then, so that would go towards the 13.2 million of Boxborough water main costs. And the remaining 7.5 million or so would be recovered through betterment fees on these 11 small water systems that would connect. So that would be the remainder of the cost to install the water main in Boxborough would get assessed to those 11 properties. And then in addition to that, just like any other customer in Littleton, these new customers in Boxborough would be required to pay connection fees as well. And if you total all those up for these 11 small water systems, it's a little over $2 million. So when you do the math and you subtract all of those sources of funding from the 19.2 million total project costs, Littleton's left with about $3 million, as a net cost that we'd have to pay. And that's compared to the $6 million if we were to just do the Taylor Street well on its own. So you cut the project cost in half essentially by combining it with the Boxborough project, and then taking it a step further, financing that project. These PFAS remediation projects are eligible for 0% interest loans through the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust. Same exact kind of loan that we have on our Wickham Ave water treatment plant here in Littleton. And we've already been, pre-approved for that 0% interest loan for the Boxborough and Taylor Street well projects as well. So over the course of 30 years, of course, at 0% interest, you're still only paying $3 million for the project. Compared to over that same 30-year time frame, if you borrowed on the open market like we normally would outside of one of these Clean Water Trust loans, and you assume an interest rate of about 5.5%, which is about where we're at nowadays, that could be up to $11 million. Might be slightly less than that based on the premium paid. We discussed that a little bit last night with some numbers from the finance committee. So it might be somewhere between $10 and $11 million that would be repaid over the 30 years. And then of course you could choose to finance the project over the course of 20 years instead of 30. At 0%, it doesn't change anything in terms of the overall loan costs that are repaid. But of course, on the 5.5% interest loan, it would reduce the total amount paid down to $9.5 million. So either way, you're saving anywhere from $6.5 to $8 million or so on the Taylor Street well project by combining it with the Boxborough water main extension project. Next slide, please.
Nick Law, the general manager of Littleton Electric Light and Water Department. Before we go to the next slide, I just kind of want to update the public on last night's meeting, the joint meeting with the select board and the finance committee. We had a very good meeting. It was about 2 hours long of deliberation, mostly on this topic itself. And some of the concerns we're hearing back from the town of Littleton to really to the finance committee and equally the select board is to make sure the liability that $7.5 million was covered, and we hear you loud and clear. And I think there's things that we can do to cover that, and we're working closely with our Littleton finance team to make sure that liability is covered. Options such as taking the possibility of taking the connection fees and putting that to an account to kind of buffer any delinquencies or any issues with betterment collections. Maybe collecting those fees associated with the 7.5 instead of through the betterment process, maybe through utility billing. So that way we're in charge of collecting our own debt. Also taking on an insurance policy through the town to make sure that $7.5 million is covered. So I think that's the biggest concern that we've heard from the town of Littleton with regards to this project, is to make sure the Littleton ratepayer, because at the end of the day, this liability falls back on the ratepayer, but to make sure that ratepayer is covered and that liability is protected for the community. So we are working diligently on that with the town of Littleton's staff as we move towards town meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, really just one more slide just to kind of wrap up this topic, and then we'll take any questions on this before we move on to the next one. But I think this really is one of those win-win projects where we're assisting the lower income portion of Boxborough to have access to a source of clean water supply. Then, we're obviously also saving the town of Littleton quite a bit of money. And as Nick mentioned just a moment ago, there is a little bit of risk there. There's a huge benefit as well. But like Nick said, we do hear those concerns about risk, and we're working through multiple avenues to mitigate that risk. So as I showed, anywhere from $6.5 to $8 million savings on the Taylor Street well. So that's a win for Littleton right there. And then I mentioned it's sort of in passing that the Taylor Street well is going to be permitted for 500,000 gallons per day. Those 11 small water systems in Boxborough only use about 65,000 gallons per day. That's only 13% of the new source of water supply that we'll have available. So the remaining 87% will be available for Littleton and its future growth as we move forward in years ahead. So that pretty much covers all the topics I wanted to discuss. We'll open it up to questions from anyone in the room or online or George.
Yeah, George Sanders, 672 Great Wood. I'd like to take this opportunity to point out to the citizen here in Littleton that first and foremost, I think that we probably have one of the finest water and electric enterprise here in the state of Massachusetts. You're doing exactly what the enterprise calls for. You either do capital improvements or you reduce the rate of the service that's being supplied to the ratepayers. And you've been doing a fine job, as far as I'm concerned, with regards to that. And I think this is a project that first we have to go back and look at the fact of how we came about to this. And it was because of the dealing with the Amazon and the realty on Taylor Street when they built that building over there. Somehow they thought the goodness of giving Littleton something in return. And they said, well, this wetland, which was 56 or 58 acres over there, we didn't have to pay for that. And went out and tested that. One of the most precious commodities that we have is the air, the oxygen that we breathe in, and the other one is water. We certainly cannot do it without water. Water is something that we need, and EPA eventually is going to make cities and towns clean up the water. And they already started knowing that this PFAS is very dangerous, and it's all over the country. It's not just here. So we're going to be at a point that we're going to have to do something. And this particular case, we're doing something trying to help our neighbor, which is Boxborough. Boxborough has a need over there because their water has PFAS in it. When Littleton noted that there was PFAS, DEP gave you permission to consolidate one well with another to try to reduce that amount of contamination. And you did a good job on doing it. And the next thing, within 9 months or maybe less than that, we're breaking ground to put a PFAS treatment system in. Normally, when you have well water, you don't have to do the surface. Surface water, you have to treat it. I know in Fitchburg, when I was in Fitchburg, we put in 2 plants. At that time, it was $25 million per plant there. So here we have an opportunity here to help Boxborough, the people over there that need clean water. Everybody needs clean drinking water. And I give you thumbs up for what this enterprise is trying to do. They're trying to help the people in Boxborough over there. And I would hope that Boxborough is appreciative of what Littleton is reaching out as a neighbor, trying to help the people over there in Boxborough, because they need the help. They need clean drinking water over there, just like we need clean drinking water. We're only going to pick up a fraction of what it's going to cost for us to have that plant. So if we can help them and get all the pieces in place with the MIA and Boxborough and Littleton, and we get our treasurer and the FinCom and the select board all on the same sheet of music, then we can go forward and do what we need to do. And that's provide clean water to us and to Boxborough over there. And I want to thank you.
Thank you, George. Listen. Chase?
I got a few questions for you. One, the first is how this obligates us or doesn't obligate us to extend connections further into Boxborough. So this isn't the only area of Boxborough with PFAS contamination in their groundwater. Does extending this sort of spur right now obligate us or open the door to us having to extend this further into Boxborough at some point?
No, it doesn't obligate us in any way. We've been pretty clear all along to Boxborough and to the other parties involved, the Mass DEP, we've been meeting with on this project on a monthly basis as well, that Littleton doesn't have an endless supply of water. We can spare the 65,000 gallons per day once we get the new well online, but we have no intention of providing anything more than that. So as part of the intermunicipal agreement that we're working on right now with Boxborough, we're defining the parameters of that. So that's still a topic of discussion with Boxborough, but that's our goal is to limit the amount of water that we're providing.
And Corey, those properties are actually identified in the IMA.
Yes, the IMA lists the 11 properties that would be served.
Okay, so that was a follow-up question. So that the constraints that are on the property is not necessarily on the flow rate. So if they need more water, we'll be obligated to provide water, but only to those particular properties.
Yeah, we're still working through that IMA from Littleton standpoint. We also want to talk about flow, not just properties, because obviously the use of a property could change. It could, get us in a situation. If we can't get that through the IMA, we'll get that through the individual agreements with those associations that are on the property.
Okay, so that then follows up. So these are residential properties right now in Boxborough? They're residential.
So yeah, they're a combination of both. Yes.
But are they in commercial uses water intensive, or are they just sort of standard commercial?
They're mostly like office parks or very light industrial. They're not large water users.
So do we have the latitude then to restrict future uses there that could be incredibly water intensive? I don't know. Someone comes in and they want to open up, I don't know, dry cleaner or something like that, and all of a sudden they're using 50,000 gallons of water just for a single commercial.
Right. I think that's where the individual agreements come in. There's a couple of different topics that we need to have individual agreements with each customer on. So that's where we're planning to incorporate that. But overall, for this portion of Boxborough, this is the 65,000 gallons per day that we're referencing in the IMA.
Next question. Sorry, I've got a few, and I don't mean to monopolize this, but
Actually, can I jump in?
Yeah.
So one, just related to that, I think one of the properties is the old Cisco campus, which is not fully built out
Right.
still. So what's the provision there if they decide to build out a marijuana cultivation facility and use, 10,000 gallons a day?
Yeah, again, we would have an individual agreement with them of, about the maximum amount of water we would provide. I don't think that in that particular property would have an issue because they do have their own well. That's
But
they're pretty large.
yeah, okay.
But
Yeah, Matthew, that actually came up at the Boxborough Select Board meeting last night. Les Foxman is from the Boxborough Select Board. He's chair of the Littleton Select Board, Matthew, no one else. the properties, Camp Valley property is actually spelled out in that agreement, and it's 200 through 500. So all I think they had like 10 or 11 different buildings. Only the ones that are built are actually
Okay.
provided for in that agreement.
And when we say we'll enter into an agreement with the property, is this something that will carry on the deed with the properties?
Yes.
Okay, that should be my next thing.
The two-
I think this is a better forum to ask these detailed questions at the town meetings.
I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah. The financials, so when I looked at the financials, the slide that you put up doesn't have any money from the state related to PFAS contamination. Doesn't look like it's got any money from the bipartisan infrastructure deal. Nor does it look like it has any money from recoveries associated with lawsuits, PFAS contamination, et cetera. To what extent are those monies out there, and can we go get those? How do those factor into the economics of this? And if those monies are realized, who benefits from them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think on the slide that shows the summary of costs and funding sources, I'm trying to be conservative, but there are additional sources of funding that may come in. I mean, I think a lot of people, yourself included here in Littleton, know that on our Wickham Ave water treatment plant was a PFAS treatment facility that's almost finished construction. That was a 0% interest loan through the Clean Water Trust, just like we're talking about here. That one actually received 20% loan forgiveness, which is huge on a large project like that. We're hopeful that that will be the case on this project as well, but the state has yet to commit to 20% loan forgiveness on PFAS projects for this fiscal year. I have been hearing a little bit more chatter about it being a real possibility this year, but it hasn't been officially announced yet. So we'll just have to cross our fingers and hope that comes in and helps as well. But my understanding, the way that would work is that that would benefit the entire project. So it would save Boxborough 20% and Littleton 20% on our portion. As far as the other two funding sources you mentioned, I don't have anything specific on that. I don't know if Nick has anything otherwise.
No, but I guess just to piggyback on that, that's why partnering with Boxborough is important, because it opens us up for those grants, which we'd have zero shot at getting without the PFAS issue that Boxborough has. Obviously in Littleton, we're a party of that class action lawsuit down in South Carolina for PFAS. I'm sure we can roll those costs into that, but that gets complicated. I'm not sure if Boxborough is included in a class action lawsuit, but it should.
That was actually a follow-up
Yeah.
that I had. So Boxborough is, as I understand it, perhaps the chair of the select board has information.
I'm not the chair at the time.
Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. My hearing is very bad.
My question was, should Boxborough recover money from a class action lawsuit related to PFAS and groundwater contamination? How does that fit into this agreement, since Littleton is in some ways?
I don't know. In fact, this question came up with regard to not this project, but a known PFAS contamination site in Boxborough that's got to remediate. And I asked the very same question: how does the state, how does our participation in the statewide class action suit interact with any recovery from that particular project? And the answer is we don't know yet. I don't see any direct connection for this. That's yet to be discovered. I would think it'd be very tenuous connection, very tenuous one, and nothing I would bank on.
But that's a good point, Chase. That's something we should chase down, because if the water department's incurring PFAS related costs, then we should be able to roll those into our portion of the class action lawsuit.
I would think Littleton could recover it across the board for, help with your expenses.
Right.
And I know you guys are very good at this, but my ask of the water department would be to also leverage what we can with our federal representatives to make sure that we're accessing as much money, particularly since this is a intermunicipal agreement from the bipartisan infrastructure.
Yeah, this project has full support from Congresswoman Trahan, Senator Eldridge, Rep. Arcero, Rep. Senator in Boxborough. So we should be engaging with them to continue that support and see this financial assistance out there.
One of my fears with us getting out in front of this is that they're going to look at us and say, well, they've already got that covered, right? And we'll get passed over for honestly doing the right thing rather than waiting until someone puts a puts us in a, you know, in a consent decree situation or something. The related issue, so this area hydrologically, right, is up gradient of the Taylor Street well, a long ways up gradient, but up gradient also. To what extent, how does this work if we identify that somewhere down the line, we do need additional water treatment associated with water we're extracting from the Taylor Street well? Essentially, is the town of Littleton taxpayer on the hook to build out that treatment capacity, or does the agreement also include a way to make sure that the Foxborough participants are also sharing in the cost of any future treatment?
No, the new Boxborough customers would be treated the same as any Littleton customers. So if, well, so first of all, the Taylor Street well, I didn't really go into this. It's going to be tied into the new Wickham Ave treatment plant.
Oh, well.
So it'll already be removing iron, manganese, and PFAS, along with anything else that might be in there through the carbon filtration. But
That's $6 million, including a transmission main from the Taylor Street well back to Wickham Ave.
yeah,
But to the extent that it's EPA's new drinking water standards are significantly more stringent than our current mass adaptive standard. And we need to change our treatment train, the Foxborough residents would be sort of lumped in with.
yeah, it would be. I mean, we would most likely take on debt if we had to add some kind of treatment train, and that would be recovered the way it is now through a debt service charge that goes on everybody's water bill, proportionate to how much water they use. So it would impact the Foxborough customers the same as the Littleton.
But in that scenario, the town of Littleton would be the entity doing the borrowing. Presumably, this would require us to borrow on behalf of,
Just like.
Yeah,
Just like we are now.
right.
Our last question, I promise, is, to what extent does this extension give the Foxborough residents a say in the operations of the water department, right? They're now users, but presumably not.
Yeah, there was due to our establishment back in 1911, after 1911.
Yeah,
The board's comprised of the 5 elected officials in Littleton. We have a very similar relationship right now on the electric side. And the board, obviously made up of Littleton, is very receptive and listens to the concerns of all customers and ratepayers, but they wouldn't have a board seat. But at the end of the day, town of Littleton will elect the commissioners for light and water.
George, do you have another one?
Yeah, the question on the portion that, the town of Littleton and Taylor Street, well there. The ratepayer is gonna be picking up that portion of that, right? That.
Yeah.
Which is it the 3 or 5 million?
Well, it depends on how we go here. If we go with the combined with the Boxborough project, it ends up being a net of 3 million.
It's the 3 million.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to point that out, 'cause I know that if we then go with it, we pick up the whole thing.
Right.
Rob Houston, 55 Jennifer Street. Two things. We pay the 3 million as ratepayers, subject to the collection of the betterment. Right? I mean, if the betterment's not collected, then we pay the 7 million, the betterment. I mean, that's the risk that you guys are talking about.
Well, you wouldn't pay the $7.5 million. There'd be a process to collect that, right? There'd be.
I'm not really trying to argue. You will figure out a way to cover that.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, that's been the commitment of the Light and Water Department. So we're relying on you to do that. You'll figure it out.
Yep.
My question is actually the ignorant one. So bear with me. It was stated that there is a need for the water from the Taylor Street well. I'm just curious if you could please explain to the citizens, me in particular, what is this need and what would we have done if Amazon had not gifted us this land? Is there a need? I'm just focusing on that threshold question.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're always looking out 10 years into the future because it takes several years to bring a project like this online.
Sure.
So, obviously we know about some pretty major developments that are going to be happening here in Littleton just over the next 5 to 7 years. So there's a need there in the short term. But just looking out even further, just that, average trends of growth in Littleton. You know, over the past 10 or 15 years, there's been tremendous growth in town. So we see our water usage going up and up and up every year. And then we see these individual new large developments come in that's an even bigger jump than what you normally see on average. So we're always looking out in advance like that. Before the Taylor Street well became a possibility, our primary focus on a new source of water supply were the Cobb's wells. So those are 3 bedrock wells near the Acton border. So that was our primary area of focus. We're still pursuing those. Those are, believe it or not, much more complicated to bring online than the Taylor Street well. So I think the Taylor Street well will be online in 2 to 3 years. I think the Cobb's wells are a decade out still probably. So we'll be bringing Taylor Street on. We'll still be pursuing Cobb's in the meantime. We'll have those eventually. And that's sort of our plan for additional water supply over the next couple of decades.
And is it additional, so follow-up question from me, is it additional water supply to address the growing needs of Littleton? Or is it additional water supply because our existing wells have a limited life capacity? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what is driving the additional need.
Yeah, it's the growth of the town of Littleton that's driving the need. The existing wells do lose capacity over time, but only because of essentially like plugging of the well itself. So you can drill a new one nearby and typically get a similar yield of water out of it. So that's not really a major concern. We can always drill another one nearby our existing ones if we run into that issue. But
Corey, I mean, should we update the public on Beaverbrook and Wickham Ave? That those have relatively recently gone through that process.
Yeah. So we have 3 existing well sites in town. The Spectacle Pond well, which is the one that we discovered PFAS contamination in a few years ago, and is why we're building a PFAS treatment plant. And then we have the Wickham Ave wells, which we just replaced a year and a half ago. So those are all brand new wells over there. And then our Beaverbrook wells, which are right across the street here, actually. And those are 9 years old now, so they're relatively new. Most wells will last 50 years or so before you need to drill a new one. So we're in pretty good shape as far as having relatively new wells.
Serving the current needs of the town. That's really what I'm trying to focus on, is what is driving. You've answered the question.
Yeah. Yep. Do you have any questions from anyone online?
I have one more. This is a little off topic, but I read that the Beaver Brook does have PFAS and it's currently below the threshold, but when the new Fed guidelines come out, it might be not acceptable. Where's that water? Is that going to go to Wickham? Or what's the plan for that?
Yeah. No, it's a good question because you know, the 20 part per trillion standard for PFAS in Massachusetts came out a couple of years ago. We got ahead of it with the Spectacle Pond well. We began building the new Wickham Ave treatment plant. We at that time figured the Beaverbrook wells were perfectly safe. They had PFAS in them, but relatively low. It was around 10 to 13 parts per trillion, so well below the 20. But then, as you say, just recently the EPA came up with their proposed new standard of 4 parts per trillion for 2 of the PFAS contaminants. And the Beaverbrook wells are just barely over that 4 part per trillion number. So we are going to have to do something there. So we're starting to plan for that now. We'll be bringing on an engineering firm to help us start evaluating options there. So we will need to add some treatment there. It's not really practical to bring that water across town to the Wickham Ave treatment plant. Or it's just, I mean, I shouldn't say it's not practical. It's not cost effective to do that. It would be more cost effective, I think, to add treatment on there. So that's what we're going to start evaluating to be able to start putting some numbers on that.
Yeah, I think the bigger point that the community probably didn't realize was that the water at Spec Pond, after going through the filtration system there, wasn't at a quality that you could put through PFAS filtration. So it was a complete redo of that plant if we move forward with that. So we actually would need to build a plant at Spec Pond and Wickham Ave, and at that point made sense to combine at one plant. Beaverbrook, the water coming out of the filters is good water. So it has the ability to go through separate PFAS filtration right at Beaverbrook. So we believe it hasn't been engineered, but that's what I believe is.
Isn't the water coming out of Beaverbrook going to Spectrum Pond and then being pumped over?
Right now, the water from Beaver Brook is going down the temporary transmission main that you can see on the side
Yeah,
of the road
the
here.
transmission line over there.
That's back to the pond and gets blended there, yeah.
Yeah, that's where it's being blended,
Yeah.
so. If that's being blended over there. I know that's temporary, so you're saying that to put something permanent in for Beaver Brook. Will be other than the temp that you got there now.
Right, yeah, we would have to build a permanent transmission main. Which at this point, who knows what that would cost? I'm guessing $6 or $7 million at this point. Things have just gotten out of control with costs.
Do you have off the top of your head how much water is being pumped daily out of our wells?
Out of all of our wells combined?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little over 1 million gallons a day, like 1.1 million. On average, gets a little bit higher in the summer.
And how much are we using of that?
All of it, yeah, so we only pump what we need each, or a little more than we need.
What you need?
Yeah. Another question back there.
This is a silly question, but I presume that you tested all the water coming out of that will come out of the new wells and that there's no PFAS in it. Or trace. I'm just curious where it sits on the PFAS spectrum.
Yeah, the Taylor Street well you're talking
Yeah.
about, the new well. No, there is PFAS there, but since we're bringing it to the Wickham Ave treatment plant that has PFAS treatment installed already, then it's not really a major concern. It's similar level of PFAS as what we'll be treating from their existing sources.
So above the 4 parts per trillion, the new standard.
Yes, it's in the 20s. So
In every well you pull.
yeah,
I'm afraid that's the case.
So other EPA has now put a standard in place for PFAS?
it's a proposed standard. It's draft right now, so there's a public comment period, and then they expect to finalize it by December of this year. So once it becomes final in December, then it's enforceable. So we need to have a plan in place by then.
So
Essentially,
right now we're using the DEP
Yeah.
standard that they put on.
right. And once the federal EPA standard comes out, every state is required to be at least
I know
that strict.
that.
So,
Yeah, I understand that.
And the standard they put out says that they'll give municipalities like 2 or 3 year runway.
right. Yeah, which is about what it takes to design and build something.
But that's still a ridiculous amount of infrastructure across the country.
Oh, yeah. Luckily here in Littleton, like I said, we got out ahead of it. The Wickham Ave plant, although it seemed like a lot of money at the time, now looks like a really good deal in retrospect, just a couple of years later. And then what we'll have to do at the Beaver Brook plant will be relatively minimal comparatively. So I think we're in decent shape here in Littleton with PFAS.
Sorry, Corey, one other question here with the cost estimate. So with the extension, you've got a pretty precise number on it, 19,209,383. Help me understand the level of accuracy of that and what contingency is or isn't in that number.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're working with the engineering firm Weston and Sampson on this project. So that's their engineering cost estimate for the construction plus 20% construction contingency plus 10% contingency that the state revolving fund program requires that you carry. So they add that extra 10% buffer on top of the typical 20%. So it's really like over 30% contingency in the number. So it may come in under that. I wouldn't want to promise that this day and age, the way things are with construction costs. I'd like to say I'd be surprised if it came in over it with the 30% buffer in there, but you never know. 30% is a pretty good buffer though.
What's that cost estimate based on? I mean, right now, have you collected any data in terms of the alignment of the piping, all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Or is it right now just a sort of class 4 estimate, kind of like?
Yeah, no, we've already completed the entire survey of the entire area. And there's already a preliminary design for the water main and the roads, so the layout's already there. And then the well and the transmission main, those are pretty straightforward things to estimate costs of. So yeah, I would say we're at like the 20% design level right now. So we're in decent shape as far as having a good estimate there.
My question is got to do with the operation of the plant on the PFAS going to the Chaco particular filters there for the PFAS. Will Boxborough be paying any portion of the disposal for those filters?
Yeah, they'll be paying their share. Because that's an operational cost that gets rolled into our operating budget, which is covered by the user fees, your water bill that you get every month or every quarter. There is a significant cost of that. Everybody will be paying for that based on how much water they use. So it's just proportional to their usage.
And there's a significant cost to the filters themselves, replacing them.
Yeah, I mean, those filters have like a 30+ year lifespan, so it's unlikely that we'll need to replace them. If there was something that broke, obviously we need to fix it, but
So
again,
there's a 30-year on replacing that?
I mean, the typical life of a treatment plant's about 30 years, so that's.
I'm talking about the filters.
Yeah, so the filters are just a component of the treatment plant.
A component of the plant, yeah, so how frequent would you have to replace those filters?
The filter vessels will never be replaced. It's a filter, what we call the filter media, which is just the granular activated carbon that's inside of the vessels. So that filter media will have to be replaced at least once a year, probably
that's
more
what
now.
I'm getting to.
Yeah, so, but the new EPA standard will probably have to be replaced even more than once a year. There's a cost to that, but that's an operational cost that'll just get recovered through the water bills.
Do we know roughly what the cost on those filters are?
If you replace all of the media and all of the 4 filters, it's about $500,000 every time.
Oh,
But that's not every year.
It's projected to be every year.
Oh, $500,000 a year for the media.
That's the projection from the engineers. We'll see how it plays out the first year.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Expensive chunk.
well, I think the point is that the disposal is where the cost involved in
Yes,
that.
yeah, it's the only way to dispose of it. It's a hazardous waste. It needs to be incinerated at extremely high temperatures of 10,000 degrees Celsius, which is not your run-of-the-mill incinerator, so there's high cost for that.
Fire pit in the backyard.
It doesn't cut it enough.
More questions in the room? Anything online?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bring up Nick Lawler to talk about the sewer project.
Last time this was easier than Boxborough. I'm sure they'll switch tonight. All right, thanks again, Nick Lawler, General Manager of Littleton Electric Light and Water Departments. So we have 2 big articles at town meeting, obviously one Corey just spoke about the Boxborough project and Taylor Street well, but also a funding authorization for the sewer project. And one thing that we like to kind of start with is talking about the fact that we already have a sewer system here in Littleton. We talked about this last night at select board meeting. We have an existing system, discharge capacity of 17,000 gallons per day. Discharge sites at the current high school. Plants at the high school as well. It's over 20 years old. And the plant's end of life, and the plant is doing its job, but it's time to start kind of looking forward to a new solution. It ties into 6 municipal buildings. It's something that we've been kind of wrestling with for really decades. The community's been trying to find out how to bring economic development to the center of town, how to clean up the groundwater there, because there's some high nitrates in the center of the town as well. And how do we do an environmental and economic project all at the same time while replacing an existing sewer plant that's end of life, and do it in an economic way? It's something I know the select board and commissioners have struggled with this for years on how to kind of make this economical. And we talked about ways of doing it by building a new plant and kind of building what's called the spine, and getting sewer capacity down to the center of Littleton. And then as we started kind of going down that process is when 550 King Street sold to the Lapoli companies and brought forward a partnership that actually made the project viable. So the first thing we did, actually, I believe this happened, it was kind of right around the same time with the switch from select board to the commissioners. But the select board did a lot of work over the years as far as setting up the sewer department, setting up the enterprise fund, really the beginning stages of feasibility, the beginning stages of how does this look. And then they turned to the commissioners and we did what was a needs assessment at the time. So that's right to understand what the entire needs of the community were. Identify siting for a treatment plant, 'cause I think that was one of the things that we were struggling with in the town, is where to site a treatment plant. And using our engineer, CDM Smith, we identified 3 parcels and went through every parcel in town, and through criteria, we were able to limit it down to 3 parcels. Went through an RFP process and ended up with 242 King Street. For a lot of reasons, proximity to 495, lack of neighbors, low visibility. Some of the things that I think the select board at the time was hearing about, issues with siting of a plant. So we purchased 242 King Street. We designed a plant there. I think the next slide might show that. So there's the plant design tucked up against 495. This does involve the demolition of the old carriage house garage barn that's there. We worked closely with Littleton Historic Commission and Linda Stein in particular to identify beams and floorboards and things that had historic importance that we're working with to salvage out of that barn. The house itself won't be demoed as part of that project. It's outside of the scope of construction. So we'll continue to work with her and the Historic Commission and Select Board as far as the commissioners, as far as what to do with that part of the property. Our goal right now is to build a sewer plant and get that moving forward. And then we'll kind of deal with the rest of the property when that time comes. The demolition of that barn actually commenced yesterday. And I think next week is really when you'll start seeing some really demo work. They're doing some asbestos pavement right now, stuff like that. If you look at the picture, the majority of the plant's actually underground tankage, and what's highlighted in the darker lines is actually the facility that you'll see from the property. So we've been talking about this for years, discharge site at the high school. I think this was, this goes back maybe 2020, 19, that we got town meeting authorization to build discharge site. Then we kind of ran into some issues with DEP as far as when we were allowed to actually build the discharge site, because they're kind of tying that back to the system in its entirety. So even though they approved the design and the application of discharge site, they wouldn't allow us to build it until the whole system was designed, because really that's their only ability to kind of weigh in on the system at whole. But we finally were able to begin construction with that. Like I said last night at the select board meeting, Honors Corporation has been fantastic to work with. The schools have been tremendous partners in this. Obviously, it's highly disruptive to the school department, and they've been very good partners in the community to make sure this project is successful. They're over half done. This should be completed by mid-June. And one of the things that we heard through this process is making sure the fields come back. You know, Littleton doesn't have a lot of fields, and getting these fields back to use was a priority of both the schools and the town. So as part of this project, we're going to sod the fields and not just seed them, try to get good growth back there quickly. But the schools also know the cost to that, so they're not going to open that until they feel comfortable. If it's a dry summer, they won't be here in the fall. But if we get a relatively wet summer and the fields take well, then those fields could be open in the fall. But I know Dave's got a few slides there if you want to show them, Dave. The capacity of this discharge site is 243,000 gallons per day. It's completely different than the 17,000 gallon per day discharge site. It's a completely new build. There's no tie between the two. They're just in different parts of the site. So as you can see, there's a lot of work going on there. Onyx is moving extremely quick through that project.
Can I interject a question?
Yes, George.
What's the capacity of this discharge site? I mean, what is the max that you can put up there and discharging?
Yeah, that goes back to actually the select board. I think Chase was heavily involved in that. I had Weston and Sam's to do the hydrogeo report. And I think it's a very debatable number. DEP says right now it's 243,000 gallons per day. I think the hydrogeo report showed a little over 300,000 gallons per day. But that's one of those things that as time goes on and we monitor the conditions out there as we pump effluent to the discharge site, we'll work with DEP in increasing that. But for planning purposes, it's 243,000 gallons per day.
So do we have the capacity there to expand to the 300?
Time will tell. The engineering report says yes. and DEP is not quite sure yet. So we need to monitor, as we pump water to it, monitor what the conditions are doing and see if we can increase that.
Well, one of the good reasons that you decided that you were gonna recharge in Littleton, because initially when we were doing the study committee was that we was gonna be taking water, and at that time was going over to air.
Yep.
And they were saying that the water table here, we're drawing it out and sending it somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a different aquifer anyway, that's part of that, feasibility peer review that was done, needs assessment by CDM Smith. That was looked at as far as an option, it doesn't make sense to extend air system to Littleton. But in the end, we're actually taking water, instead of recharging our aquifer, we're taking it out of town and losing it. So the commissioners and the select board at that time didn't love that idea. They wanted to keep that resource in the community. So the funding article for 23 is an amended article. Back 2021, the fall town meeting, we got a borrowing authorization for $25 million. And at the time, the engineering estimate actually was 28.5, and we thought we were smart. We beat it down to 25 million, which at the time felt right, but looking back for all the wrong reasons, I'll say, because the reasons weren't right, but the number might have been right. So we need to go back and amend that borrowing authorization to allow us to award the contracts, or one of the contracts. We can award one, we can't award two, to move the project forward. And if you go to the next slide, it will show a complete breakdown of the financials. And this project gets complicated because it's been going on for many years. There's been many town meeting articles. There's been many different projects. So we tried to show it in a way that was transparent to the entire community as far as what's been put into the project and what articles are there to support it. So if you look at the top left column, you have costs that were associated early on, design of the system, acquisition of land, and then you have corresponding town meeting articles in the right column that actually matched that. You had a $2.2 million town meeting article in 2018, the 1.65 in 2019 to allow the community to move forward with this project. And everything was going smooth, and you can see the $2.5 million town meeting article in 2020, that was for the discharge site. And then we got the 25 million in 2021. And then once we started designing and getting this thing out to bid, that's when kind of economic conditions changed, not just in Littleton, but across the world. And the project cost came in extremely high. And really the first one, the $15.5 million contract, that was the one that was really out of whack with engineering estimates. And that's the installation of the sewer infrastructure in the roads, the sewer pipe collection system, and redoing a pump station at the middle school and making a new pump station at the high school. Because one of the benefits of this project is they actually get a sewer treatment plant off the high school, but now they need a pump to the new treatment plant. The engineering estimates for that project were around $8 million, and it came in at 15.5. There's 5 bidders for that contract. It's a very similar project as the water transmission main down Spec Pond Road and Air Road. And for that bid, we had 17 contractors. Just to give you an idea of how the competitive landscape has changed just in 2 years. And we believe that due to all the federal funds, these contractors are extremely busy. So a lot of jobs out there. And there aren't many more contracts. It's the same contractors there were a couple of years ago. So it's not a great competitive climate right now to be doing infrastructure work. And I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon. It just seems like this is kind of the new way of the world. The $19.9 million contract there, that's for building the treatment plant at 242 King Street. That actually came in right around engineering estimates, which, as Corey said, shocking that the treatment plant for 500,000 gallons per day wastewater costs $3 million more than a 3 million gallon per day PFAS water filtration plant. But that actually came in where engineers started with. The effluent recharge project discharge site that came in again where estimates started to come in. And the bond demo is on there, and that's just in there just to show the numbers. It's a small project, doesn't really move the needle, but it is a cost that we incurred. We're carrying a 10%, I mean, a 5% construction contingency. That's the $1.9 million, which is low for this type of project, but we're trying to have the ask at town meeting as light as possible. And then the construction services, that's for full oversight and engineering services throughout the project for all the contracts or sewer. Is 2.4 million. And then obviously the police details, that's as required for SRF. That number even seems a little high to me as well. And then if you match it up with the town meeting authorizations that we've already received and opportunities for external funding that may exist for this project between the economic development earmark that we received back in 2022 as Governor Baker was leaving office for $8 million, $2 million credit from the town is from their opera funds, and then two $1.5 million Mass Works projects. One from 2018 that was specifically used for the discharge site, and a recent one from this past year that's towards the project. We still end up $3 million with a $3 million funding gap. We've secured a 1.5% loan for this project through the SRF program and the Clean Water Trust, which at the time didn't really seem worth it, but now seems really good. We're almost debating whether or not to do it because there's a lot of paperwork and administration oversight with SRF loans. But we're real happy that we made a decision to do that part of the project. And they've committed $31.938 million of loan authorizations to do that. And the $4.438 million ask gets us to that ceiling. So it allows us to maximize that loan, that low interest loan if we need it. So that's where the number comes from. And obviously it'd be a not to exceed. And any extra funds would go into that contingency that might be needed for the project. But yeah, that's it on a high level. I'll take questions, George.
How much time we got left on Mass grant?
So the first $1.5 million grant, the one that I believe Chase was instrumental in getting for the discharge site, that actually will be expended probably this week or next week. So that won't be fully expended and gone. And then the following $1.5 million Mass Works grant, we got some time for. We have years to spend it. I think it's maybe 30 months.
Well, I think it's good that you mentioned the fact that with this particular project and with this particular article, it's going to go before the town meeting. There's no taxpayers' money that's going to be involved with this particular article. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. So this is paid for by the users. And for instance, the Littleton companies is a 62% user. So they'll pay 62% of the cost. The betterment calculation is done per gallons used. The town is a user, right? So the town does have.
Well, I know about.
Oh, right, yes.
That aspect, what the town got coming, the town gonna charge all taxpayers to pay for the municipality. I understand that.
Yeah, there's not a separate tax going on everybody's bill, correct?
Yeah.
And the impact, and I had Corey run this, and the current projected betterment to the town will be about $850,000. This adds about $120,000 to that expected betterment. So just shy of $1 million will be the town's contribution of other than the $2 million, they've already committed $2 million. Or in the process of committing $2 million. So other than the DARPA funds, it'll be another $1 million in betterment fees over 30 years that's collected. That's not one time.
How does that compare to if the town simply had to build another water treatment facility to replace the one that is being removed from the high school?
Yeah, you remember those numbers, right? They
Well,
went-
maybe that's a leading question.
Yeah, the time we were looking at that before 550 was being redeveloped, I think the plants were right around $12 to $15 million. And I still think we were trying to find ways to get it to the common in some ways, but the town was going to be the hook for the bulk of it. Yeah. I never thought sewer would be easier than water. It's 2 nights in a row.
Well, I think But there's a big difference because, you have users that are going to pay for this versus, taxpayers saying have to cough up and put out this money with it. I think that makes a big difference with this project.
Yeah.
Is that, taxpayers, because when I was doing the program along with, the sewer, commission there on LCTV, I was talking because at one point, 550 was never, Sal was never in the picture. But we need to do something because it wasn't gonna get any cheaper. Because the town of Venture and cities are going to have to put in treatment of the water, of the sewer. You're gonna have to stop putting in septic system because EPA, under the Clean Water Act, want the water cleaned up. And the only way you're gonna do that, I know a small town, which is my hometown in South Carolina, which probably wasn't much more than 5,000 or 6,000. They had to put in a sewer treatment plant. And people just didn't quite understand it. But the fact is that they had to clean up the water. And, you know, now you got this momentum going with EPA at that time was clean the water, clean the water. So that's where we at now.
Yeah.
And I think that we're fortunate here in Littleton that we are able to have somebody coming in and helping out a good percentage of the operation of it.
Any questions online?
You have one more question, just to make sure I understand. So the 15,563 number, that's a bid number, right? If you had the authorization, you'd sign the contract for that amount right now.
I would unfortunately like to sign both those contracts. As disgusting as that one is. Because with 5 bidders, they've already had in towns around us, I think 4 bids in the last 2 weeks. So these contractors are lining work up. And the longer we wait and don't get one of them signed, the less competition we're gonna have.
But my point is, that's a precise number based on the.
Oh, these are all big numbers, yeah.
Is there any chance that, I mean, I got crushed in some big bids last year because contractors were freaking out with supply chain and inflation and stuff like that. Is there any opportunity for those numbers in the way that the contract would be structured or how it was bid for those to flow down based on improved material costs, or are you locked into that number?
No, we're pretty locked in. We've been trying to work with the sewer collection system on materials used. We might have some success, but it won't be enough to.
But it'll be on the quantity side, not on your rate side.
It could be material, a type of material, stuff like that, but it's not gonna move the needle on what we need to complete the project.
But out of the bid, that is the best price, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
What's the highest?
24 million.
Oh,
And the other, I guess the only plus side to that number is, and it's not shown in there, but as part of that project, and it's in the verbiage, but it's not in the number, was some water main replacement. You know, trouble spots from the Common to Donlands, and if you've been in town long enough, you've seen plenty of water main breaks there. Russell Street, that breaks in front of the school, replacing aging infrastructure in the same areas that we're installing sewer main, and that came in at 3.9 million. Which again, 2 years ago seemed terrible, but it's actually a really good price today. And that comes out of the water enterprise funds. So I didn't want to show it as a sewer cost, but that is a side benefit to being able to award that contract. Is we actually get sewer water main installed at a relatively good price for today.
I know this might be down the road somewhat, because I know when, workers came in over there, one of the things they was hoping that the sewer would come in, and of course they said, yeah, that they would, sign on to it, because Gino was telling them about when you come out on, upgrading your, facility over there, was to put a wire in and block off one side, so you could block off the side that go into your septic there and pump it down and so forth, and then you can come out to the street. Now, I know we're gonna be coming with the 410 up there with Sal. Are you gonna come down 119 there And you got Russell Street over there. Now you're gonna go across the bridge to go up to the high school. So if you was going to advance, not just if, the mall up here. I know they got their system down there, which would be another entity that could tie in. Would you come across 495 on this end of Great Road, or would you take and bring it across on Russell Street and bring it all the way down?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things. We got limited discharge, so to be able to start connecting all these properties is a challenge. That being said, if Mass DOT was to do one of those bridges over, I think we take that opportunity to get sewer main in the bridge for future expansion. That's one thing this community's actually done very good job at over the years. In fact, as part of that Boxborough project, we're able to utilize pipe infrastructure that was placed on the Route 2 crossing 20, 30 years ago, whenever that one was done. So I think our goal will be to set up the future to have the ability, but I don't think in our careers we're going to be expanding, to those properties. You're up.
Just a quick suggestion, because it caused confusion last night and it caused some confusion tonight too.
Mhm.
The Littleton Commons sewer expansion and water main replacement.
Water.
It's not, right? That $15 million number is just the Littleton Commons sewer expansion.
Yeah.
Because the $3 million is coming out of a different fund.
Yeah.
So you're confusing people by having water main expansion in there,
Yeah.
replacement, because that number and this project is not that.
Yeah.
So I would just suggest that before town meeting, you delete those words.
Yeah, those are engineer brains going to good point. Yeah, thanks, Rob. That's the name of the contract. That's how they get in there.
I'm sure.
It's confusing.
I'm not disputing that
Yeah.
aspersions against it. I'm just saying as a listener, you're confusing me.
Yep.
And that's what you don't want at town meeting.
Right. Okay. Still no questions?
No.
Any more questions here?
Now.
Well, thank everybody for your time tonight, everybody at home, and really appreciate your support on Monday and look forward to continue to work with everybody to get the answers that we need to be successful. Have a good night.
Thank you for so much.